Good morning. This is the session on Decoding State System panel. Our speakers today are Allie Niemi, Rick Wood, and Janet Wilson. Allie Niemi is a dedicated parent professional advocate and expert in navigating state systems for individuals with disabilities. Allie's extensive knowledge and personal experience have made her a valuable resource for families seeking support and services. Rick Wood is an estate planning and family law attorney, as well as a dedicated Phelan-McDermid syndrome dad. Rick brings invaluable expertise and personal experience to help families navigate the complex legal landscape surrounding guardianship, estate planning, and special needs trusts. And finally, Janet Wilson is a multidisciplinary trained coordinator in disability concerns and legislative advocacy. Janet's personal experience in raising her daughter with Phelan-McDermid syndrome has fueled her passion to empower other caregivers with knowledge to thrive and grow. Please welcome the three speakers, and Allie Niemi will start first.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's been a great week so far, and I really appreciate you showing up for this last sessions here. So hopefully we can give you some good information. We're going to be talking about state systems today, which is a pretty broad topic. So we have decided to call it Decoding State Systems panels, because there's a lot of terms that you might hear as you're trying to advocate and seek support for your family member, and there's a lot of acronyms that government likes to use. So our goal today is to give you some of that terminology and knowledge as you move forward and looking for supports for your family. We will be focusing on the U.S. state systems support, so international attendees, you're more than welcome to listen and laugh at our complicated system. But it's going to be less useful for you. All right. Let me get this moved. There we go. I'm going to talk a little bit more about my background before I go into it, and then I'll be handing it over to Rick and Janet later this session as well. So as mentioned, I have a daughter who has PMS, and she's 9. And my professional background, though, is in state government. I worked for the Minnesota Department of Human Services for 13 years, in mostly around housing and homelessness policy. And I also did Social Security advocacy, disability and services and healthcare, and have a lot of background too in like some of the mental health services. So I've kind of been through it all. I currently do private consulting in the same housing and homeless arena, and am a mom to my 3 kids as well. So that's a little bit about my background. I will say, I worked in the Minnesota Department of Human Services, so this is going to be kind of a common refrain, I think, throughout the session, is that what's true in one state is not going to be true in another state. That's just the way that this is set up. There's some federal programs, which is what we're going to kind of focus on in the beginning here. But even with the federal programs, every state gets to have its own little flavor of how they implement things. So our goal is really to kind of give you some of that background and baseline information about what's available and what's out there, and then hopefully give you some ideas of tools and resources to go back to where you're from and within your own state. And even a lot of these are really super specific local in your county, city, geographic region, and figure out kind of how what we're talking about today looks like for where you live specifically. Because we're not going to be able to answer all the questions that people might have about a specific situation or a specific state. I don't think anybody would be able to do that, but we can kind of give you some of those basic terms and knowledge to help you hopefully advocate within your own local region and kind of figure out where to go from there. All right, so goal, untangle the mysteries of accessing the state supports a little bit, possibly. Learn some of the meaning about the different terms that you might hear. Understand what services and supports might be available and find out where to get more information. Our agenda today, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of some of these common terms and programs to kind of get everybody on the same page. Rick is going to talk about self-determination and services, and then Janet will kind of pull it all together and help people understand how to navigate the system a little bit better. All right, so as I mentioned at the beginning, state systems, this is a really broad topic. So I put this in here to give you an idea of, here are some of the things that you might be thinking about that might be in your local area that are a possible service or support that your family member could access. And there's a whole range of things that are out there. I think the challenge is knowing like where to find them and what the eligibility requirements are, and really having like a good understanding or a good partner. Janet will talk a little bit about like other agencies that can support you in this, navigating this system to find out like how to get through all of this. And today we're really going to be focusing on kind of that first one, the income support and cash benefits, and then the second two, medical care and health insurance, because as I mentioned, those are like the kind of the baseline federal programs that are really often kind of the key, the gateway to getting into all these other things. So they're the things that you need to understand the most, I would say, before you start looking into these other things. It's not always true, like there's often services that you can access without going through those 3 doors first, but often the cases that you're gonna need to look at SSI, Medicaid, before getting into these other services. Okay, so I have, I believe, 3 terms that I'm gonna go through and give you a little bit more of information on, so before we move into kind of the how-to. So SSI stands for Supplemental Security Income. This is the federal program that is for people with low income with disabilities to have cash benefits to help them with their basic necessities. It's administered by the local Social Security Administration office, and this is based on either the individual, if they're over 18, their income and assets, or for children under 18, they're going to be looking at families' income and assets. So if you make more or than the income limit or have more assets than the asset limit, you will not qualify for SSI. They have a lot of rules on how they look at what counts as income. You have different, there's just a huge formula and lots of rules on how they do this, but in general, what you need to know is that they will be looking at income for you to qualify for this. And how do they define disability for a child? So one part of being eligible for SSI is the income and asset limits, and then the second piece is the disability piece. So Social Security for children is they're looking at the child's ability to function as compared to other children of the same age. And they have a whole guidebook and list of rules of what this means and how they figure this out. One thing that's really important to know for you all is that there is a part of this system called compassionate allowance. At one point in time, Social Security decided that there were some conditions that were consistently severe enough and impacting people's functioning so much that they didn't need to go through this whole disability determination process. They didn't need to ask all these questions and look through every single detail, because they knew that at the end of it, it was very likely that this person, individual, or child would qualify. So they have a list of these conditions that's called compassionate allowance, and that allows a claim to be expedited. So they're not going to be going through the entire disability determination process that they normally would. And the key thing to know here is that Phelan-McDermid syndrome is on the list of compassionate allowances. It's not really like a guarantee, but it expedites your case, and it makes it much more likely to go through that. This disability definition is important to remember for the next things I'm going to talk about. All right. Medicaid is the next term. Medicaid is the single largest health insurer in the United States. And as I mentioned, every state has their own little flavor on Medicaid, and so it's often not called Medicaid in your state. In Minnesota, it's called medical assistance. In California, it's Medi-Cal, correct? Mm-hmm. And every state has like their own name for it. It's also can be administered through health plans, MCOs, HMOs. So they have different names for it too. But the idea is that the federal government is the payer under the Medicaid insurance. There's a couple different ways that you can qualify for Medicaid, and they're listed here. So one is for low-income adults, children, and pregnant women. Again, kind of like with the SSI, they're looking at your income and your assets and kind of going through that and seeing if you qualify. Elderly adults, and then people with disabilities. So think back to that disability definition. That is that Social Security uses for SSI. That is the definition that Medicaid is using to see if you qualify for Medicaid. So that compassionate allowance with Phelan-McDermid syndrome, as listed there, that applies often for qualifying for Medicaid in your state as well. So in most states, children who get SSI also receive Medicaid coverage. Often it's an automatic. If you get SSI, you get a Medicaid with it. In other states, you might have to go and sign up for it individually. And for Medicaid, you're going to be looking at your state Medicaid agency or a local county social service office to apply, not the Social Security. Even though they use the same definition for disability, this is administered through a state agency that covers healthcare. The other really important thing to know here is that there are waivers that states can use to allow families with children who have a disability, who maybe are over income, over assets, and don't typically qualify for Medicaid, to get healthcare coverage and services through Medicaid. And so there's, again, different names for this in every state. In Minnesota, we call it TEFRA, which is the federal tax law or something that it applies to. There's also Katie Beckett waivers. And so this allows you to apply for Medicaid and get that health coverage and services even if you're over income or over assets. And again, think back to that disability definition. This is what they're going to be using, again, to determine if your family member or child, well, in this case, a child, this is specifically for children, would qualify. So the other key thing about Medicaid is that it covers home and community-based services, and you'll often hear these described as, or called waivers. Sometimes 1915C waivers is the other, disability waivers. You might hear that term. And these are services that allow an individual with disabilities that would maybe typically in the past have been served in a hospital or some other long-term residential facility to be served in their own home. And so these are services that you're not typically ever, if anyone has private health insurance that covers these services, that would be amazing, but no, you're gonna have to go through Medicaid to get through to these types of waiver services. The services there's usually kind of like you qualify for the waiver, and then there's like a big list of services within the waiver that you could access once you qualify for the waiver. This could include home respite, home modifications, family training, medical equipment, home health nursing, and behavioral services. So the waivers usually vary by state and are often categorized into different disability types. And a lot of states have multiple waivers, so you would have to figure out like which waiver you qualify under. The main disadvantage for these waivers are that they are not entitlements. Medicaid, SSI entitlements, if you qualify, you get it. For waivers, the state does not necessarily have to supply you with the waiver services. There can be a wait list, and often many states have very, very long wait lists. I think it's getting better in many areas of the country. I know in Minnesota, they've worked really hard to get these wait lists down and have been under a court order to eliminate the wait list. So it's pretty close to eliminated here in Minnesota now. But it does mean that this is something that even if your child maybe you don't necessarily need right this minute, you might want to start looking into and thinking about, because you could be waiting for a long time to access these services. Okay. Now that we have some of these terms done, I'm going to hand it over to Rick, who's going to talk about how to organize, set up your services in a way that works for your family. Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, I think good enough. Good morning, everybody. I'm only going to spend about 10 minutes talking about something that exists in California and other states that is entitled self-determination in our instance of self-determination program. But before I do that, as I sat listening to Ali's presentation, one of the things that we have to add to the long list of things that we worry about, which is the health of our children, the lives of our children, the safety of our children, is that you have to become advocates. And if you're not, all these things that are available are not going to come to you, because they don't call you up one day and say, oh, by the way, we understand you have a child with a disability and it's a very rare disorder, and you might qualify for some services. Maybe in some communities in the country they do that, but that is not my experience in most communities, and certainly not in mine. One of the examples of that is that when like many of your children, when our son was born, of course, there were a pile of medical expenses, and we had an insurance plan, but of course we had copay and we had deductibles, and we incurred a whole lot of debt. And I felt like for a period of time, like 3 years, I had a second mortgage payment because I was just paying and paying and paying. And one time, a person who was providing services said, "Hey, have you looked into Medi-Cal, which is Medicaid?" I said, well, no, actually I haven't, because we have family income, I'm sure, that would not allow us to qualify. And the person said, well, yeah, but your child can qualify. I said, you got to be kidding me. I've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, paying medical bills. And sure enough, we applied for Medicaid. His disability, for some of you, my child, Davis, is almost 29 next month. And he was the 34th in the world to have been diagnosed. So you can only imagine that nobody knew what this was. Nobody knew what to do first, second, third, and fourth. And I don't know whether the syndrome qualified, I'm sure it probably didn't, for compassionate allowance. And so it was this wonderful surprise. And in the end, it's a money gift. And so that's what we do in this country. And we do it inconsistently throughout the 50 states, but there are funds available for you to access services and supports that you otherwise could not afford to do. So my message is that you become advocates. And if you feel like you're not a good advocate or you're not strong enough, well, you got to think about it again, because there's nobody else who's going to do it for you. And I'm sure I'm speaking to most people who are already advocates, as you have to be in all of these other areas as well. So that's sort of my comment that I think is important for everybody to understand. This does not just happen. So let me get back to the intro. So the intro that stated who I am and all of that stuff actually is the one that, if anybody attends in the afternoon, is for the estate planning session. I'm an attorney, a longtime attorney. My firm has an estate plan, a business, and family law practice. And so we're very familiar with things like guardianships and conservatorships and special needs trusts and all of the things that are related to those. But that's not for today. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because 25 years ago, California decided to follow the lead of a couple of other states, notably Michigan, and established what is known as a self-determination program. So why am I talking to everybody who's from all these different states about self-determination? You can call it self-directed services. They're can be the same and are in many instances very different, but it is a national trend that is changing the way that services and supports are delivered to our kids and our families. And so you saw a whole giant chart of things that are available that Ali put up. One of the things, many of the things, or the categories include things that will help you in your life and the daily life of your child to live his or her best life. So 25 years ago, we were fortunate enough to have been selected as one of 150 families to participate in a self-determination pilot. And so we were in that pilot as one of 150 in the state, and I'll talk to you about how it's different from the way you're probably receiving services and supports in a minute. That program in California, after a very long time, has become law and is available to the nearly 400,000 developmentally and intellectually disabled people in this state, in my state of 40 million people. Now, California sometimes leads the way, and sometimes California is behind. Its model was based in part upon the model that was set up in Michigan. Florida has a very robust program. Massachusetts has a very robust program. And California is an entitlement state, meaning anybody who wants to be in and receive services can get them. The question is, how are they going to do that? And why should they do it a little differently? So I'm going to see whether we have, let me go. Does this go back? All right. So the self-determination program, the way that I describe it is that it's a contemporary alternative to traditional delivery of services and supports. Okay, here is what I mean by that. I'm sure that in your state you have a Department of Social Services, Human Services. California, we call it DDS, Department of Developmental Services, and they typically will tell you what is available for you and your family to live whatever that best life is. Well, the problem is there's hardly any of us. They don't really know what we need because we have a variety of problems typically, and therefore we don't fall within a category. But one of the experiences that I had, my family had, is that they would essentially tell us what services and supports are available to us, and we didn't have any choice about what those were going to be. And so, it wasn't working. And I'll give you an example early on for those who have young children. We qualified for this supplement that you give infants, and I can't remember now because I'm old, but for kids that were undernourished. And our child was not thriving very well. And this canned stuff that every mother will know what it is, I just can't remember. Pediasure, it's like Pediasure. Yeah, Infamil would be another example. So they said, all right, well, you qualify for this, and we have a vendor who's going to provide this. And we're like, okay, we're going to put weight on him, right? Well, it's full of sugar, lots and lots of sugar, maybe some cornstarch in there, or corn syrup in there as well. And so we weren't using it, and so we would get these things by the case. They were delivered by UPS, and so I called up the caseworker and I said, listen, we don't want this stuff anymore because it's full of sugar, and we're concerned that our child is going to get cavities, right? And she said, well, no, that's what's in your program. That's what's we've ordered this for you, and you have to take it. So we have this stack that's about 6 feet tall of these cases of these cans, which I was just giving away to whoever we could because we couldn't stop the order. The second example long ago was that our child was in diapers that were provided by a vendor that had been obviously had contracted with the state. But they were terrible. They didn't work. And everybody knows that there's this competition between Pampers and Huggies, and they make a better and better and better product, right? And those products existed at the time. And I said, listen, these diapers don't work; they leak. And they said, well, that's what you get because you're entitled to those, and so that's what you're going to get. So they would send these boxes and boxes of diapers, and we would go down to the store and we would buy Pampers and Huggies. I thought, this isn't any way to run a program. So we were selected for this program, and my eyes and the eyes of my family were really opened up because it starts with and I'll put this up, it starts with having to rethink how you're going to live your life. So the principles are freedom to choose how you want to live and receive supports. You get to decide. They can't tell you that you have to have diapers because you qualify for them, and they keep coming whether you use them or not. Secondly, you have the authority to control the money that is spent. Third, you've got support for what? What we all want, and that is participation in the community. Finally, or next, is responsibility, and what that really means is accountability for public funds, because what happens in this program is they give you a budget, and you fit what you would like to see to live your family's best life. You pick what would be good. That could be any number of things. It's not for me to tell you what it is. And then finally, confirmation, which is that you are the one that is in charge instead of the agency telling you what it is that you're going to receive. And trust me, we've been at this now for almost 29 years. We need these services and supports. It is really hard for people to live and get through a life with a child with our specific disability, much less others, without help. And the help comes from the government, and the government provides stuff that costs money. So, first of all, every state has something like self-determination. They often call it self-directed services. California is called the Self-Determination Program. Let me get back to my first statement, advocacy. You got to talk to whoever is providing anything to you about self-determination. Hey, have you heard about this? Do you know that it's coming? I understand that it's a national trend. I understand that more and more states are doing this. And by the way, the reason they are is that it's less expensive. And it's not just that the state is so wonderful. They want us to have a flexible life, and we make choices about what it is that's going to be best for ourselves and our family. But it's about the money. And what we established or proved in California is that the self-determination program can actually save money, and that's why it is going to go national. Now, most states have these giant waiting lists. California does not have a waiting list. It's an entitlement state. If you've got a disability, you get in. And so back to advocacy. Find out if whoever you are speaking to in your state, find out if we have that program, what's it called, Self-determination is a word that is out there. There was a guy named Tom Niemi in Michigan who 20 years ago thought of the idea of self-determination. He has passed away in the last 5 years, but he's the founding father of self-determination. So the first thing you do is you find out what's available. The second thing you do is you get on a list to get in it. Why am I so passionate about it? Because it works for our family. It changed our lives. We didn't have those silly diapers any longer. We didn't have the Similac any longer. We didn't have cavities. What we had was stuff that was really important to us, including caregiving at a very young age, in an age where they call it respite, but it's really caregiving. And that's what, at least in our family, it was caregiving. So, what do? You get together with your child's circle of support. That could be family, that could be neighbors, that could be physicians, that could be teachers, that could be anybody, and you sit down and you create a life plan for that person, and you update it every year. Once you know your plan, and how you do it, you start with hopes and dreams, then you set goals and objectives, and then you figure out what's available to implement the goals and objectives. So, if your state says, you can't have a wheelchair because we don't provide a wheelchair. That's not on the list of things, even though your child is not ambulatory, that's not on the list of things that are available for your child. Well, so as a practical matter, self-determination allows you to buy the wheelchair with government funds because you need it. When they said you can't have a wheelchair because it's not on the list. So after you devise a plan, you have a budget. Each state will give you a different budget. In California, we have, in some instances, $1 million budgets. And I see Diane waving at me, so I'm going to finish. Next, you identify the services that will support your plan. You then hire an independent facilitator, somebody that is versed in services that might be available in your area. You select a bill payer, that's a financial management service. You enroll in the program, your bills are paid, money is allocated, you get to decide how to spend it. It's a really, really important and cool thing. So you look at what's available. It is a trend. There are self-determination advocacy groups. Google it. Get into a chat, because if you are at the forefront, you're not only going to be a pioneer, but you're also going to get, in my experience, services and supports at no cost to you that would otherwise not be available in the traditional delivery. So, I don't know whether that's my slide or not. I bet you made that slide. Okay, this is my cue to turn it over to Janet. I haven't seen these slides before.
I haven't seen them either.
So if you have any questions about self-determination, I'm happy to speak to any and all of you. As you can imagine, I'm involved in that program and very passionate about it. Janet?
Okay, guys, I'm just going to kind of wrap up some of the stuff what they talked about, and then I'll tell you where you can possibly find some more information. So we talked about determining whether your child qualifies for SSI, how that happens, and Medicaid. If your family income is too high, you can possibly qualify for what we call TEFRA, which is tax equity. FRA. There we go. There's so many acronyms. That's one of the things that is a sticking point for a lot of parents is when you talk with officials or you talk with those that are in the know, they will a lot of times throw out stuff in acronyms, and you're like, what does that mean? And that's hard. And so I think they're going to. I've sent some resource pages to the foundation, and I think they're going to be up on their website eventually with some lists that are really helpful for you guys. And if somebody hasn't, I think we'll make one that is like a decoding sheet. And so it has all the acronyms that all these big wigs like to use to sound really good, but it does no good for the parents because they have no idea what they're talking about. So hopefully, if they don't have that, I will make one up and put it up on, give it to the foundation as well. We talked about developmental disability councils. Almost every state in the nation has one. I've sent a list of all of those to the foundation, along with their email address or their links to their websites and everything. That is a really good resource for every family to get in touch with, not only to figure out what you are qualified for in your state, what your state's different types of benefits are, because like we talked about, how your state provides some of these services is vastly different from state to state. There's also the ARC, and the ARC is in every single state. That is a great resource. And a lot of these, the DDDCOs, the ARC, they're not just going to give you information about one thing. They know about all different types of stuff, and a lot of times they know about your stuff at your local and your community level. And so there's all kinds of different things that you can find out about. A lot of states have family networks, a regional family network or a state family network. Almost every state has some type of state disability law center. That is always a very good thing, because there may come, and there likely will come, a time when you have to advocate just a little bit stronger than you really ever wanted to, whether it be with an issue with school, with medical, something like that. That's always a good resource to have in your back pocket. When we talked about SSI, we talked about the most compassionate list. We also talked about, and that's, we're on there. We're also, I don't think, has anybody throughout the conference, because I missed some sessions, have we talked about that we actually have our own ICD code? Does everybody know that? Q93.52. I may or may not have it tattooed on my arm now. I'm just saying. In heart reddish pink ink, which is kind of creepy, but okay. And then we talked about self-directed services or self-determination, and they use an individual plan, much like when you have an IEP in school. It's kind of an IEP for your life, or person-centered plan. My daughter came off our state's waiver wait list after 12 and a half years of waiting in 2019. So we have self-directed services. And it's very much catered to what Alyssa has, what Alyssa needs, which it should be. Why would we want things that Alyssa doesn't need? Why would we want to waste, when we waited 12 and a half years, why would we want to wait and waste our money on things that are not going to give her what she needs? We waited 12 and a half years. We lost a lot of things, a lot of skills in that meantime, that time between aging out of the school system and waiting for this waiver. There were so many things that could have happened and that could have kept her at the level that she was, but it wasn't available. And so she sat and she suffered and she regressed. But moving on, but we're good now. When we talked about, there's a phrase in one of the slides when it talked about how they determine if a person qualifies for certain services, and the phrase is that would require placement in a hospital or hospital or nursing home, along those lines. I don't want that to freak any parent out. That does not mean they're telling you your child has to go into a nursing home or a hospital. That's not what that means. That means, let's think about it. Your child, if you weren't there, if you were gone tomorrow, would your child be able to live on their own? No. They would have to live somewhere. They would have to have a placement. They're not saying we're going to put them there. Don't let that scare you. That's just their way to determine that your child has a high enough need that they qualify for these services. A lot of times, the terminology they use can scare parents, and I don't want it to scare you. They just have to put it in a way that proves to their funders or the federal government that this family is in need. We talked about planning out things. There's life course tools that are really great. A lot of your DDCOs and the ARCs have information about life course tools. It's a really great program. I think that's about all I have. And I think we were going to move on to if anybody had any questions.
I just, excuse me, wanted to point out, so Janet and I both put together resource sheets, and we're hoping they will be posted on the conference site in the near future if they're not on the virtual conference site already. And one resource that I had pulled for the site that I specifically was wanted to point out is a website called Kids Waivers, all one word, kidswaivers.org. And this has a map of the U.S. and a listing of every waiver that's available in each state. So it's a really great starting point if you're not sure. And so they talk about if they have that TEFRA that we mentioned, if you can qualify for Medicaid even if you're over income, and then the different disability waivers that are available for kids. So if you need a place to start, that's a great one.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have those resources on the virtual conference center, and then we can also put them on the website. So questions are starting to come in. If you haven't already, use your phone, take a picture of the QR code, and then you can enter your questions, and then I will pose them to the panel. Let's go to the first one. At what age should we begin the adult SSI process?
All right. Janet, I feel like
Okay, if you have a child and they're under 18 and you've attempted SSI, but you know that your family income is too high, and you haven't been able to take if your state doesn't have an option like at least like TEFRA or something like that, you can reach out to SSI, to Social Security Administration, and get more information and get things in place. But technically, you cannot apply for SSI as an adult until the day they turn 18. So be ready, get everything in place, and then be ready on that phone call or on that because depending on the state and their availability of their SSI offices, it may be easier for you to start the process online. They have what they call a child starter disability pack. They also have an adult disability pack. But it may need to be an in-process or an in-person program. And they're going to want some things. They're going to want a copy of that genetics report, because that's the most compassionate allowance list. They're going to want, if it's a child, they're going to want your income tax return. They're going to want a copy of birth certificate. All the, they'll let you know everything they're going to need. Was that all the question I needed? Was that all the answer? Okay.
This is a little bit of a follow-on there. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to the answer to that one, or I could move on to the next one. Okay, so any tips on what to say to get on the waiver?
Could you repeat that question?
Yes, any tips on what to say or how to present your child's disability to get on the waiver, to qualify for the waiver? I would read it that way.
So let me take a crack at that.
Okay.
First of all, let's identify what is meant by a waiver. A lot of it seems very familiar to us that we're on this panel, but what happens here is that the federal government will support the state government's needs for various things, and we call when a state applies for assistance from the federal government. So, for example, the self-determination program in California is based upon an application for a federal waiver. I don't know why they call it that, but I know that it's a process by which you, as a state, are putting forth a program that the federal government is going to partially or wholly fund. okay? And that's why we call it a waiver. So once the waiver has been granted, right, it's up to the states to implement it subject to the waiver rules, because the federal government tells you, for example, what the categories are of services and supports that are eligible for reimbursement. So I wanted to put that out. In my instance, when my child aged up, it actually was pretty uncomplicated because they knew that his disability qualified him. But you're right, you've got to prove it. You've got to present the genetics report, and I can't remember what other documents we presented. Money cannot, SSI, which is not Social Security income, it's supplemental security income, is for those with disabilities. SSI was available at the time that he turned 18, and so we prepared for that, made the application when he was 18. It was granted, and then the first payment was retroactive to the month in which or I think the month after he actually turned 18. So it was not a complicated process.
I think one thing I would say about when you're applying for particularly like waivers and SSI in general, I think it's like natural human tendency to try to make things like seem better than they are, and to not want to kind of like understandably reveal like the dirty, difficult parts of your life. This is not one of those times. This is understate your child's abilities, please. Don't. Just do it. Yep. So you want to be right. You want to be truthful, but you want to talk about the realities. And there are other times where you're gonna be doing planning stuff for your children, and you're gonna focus on strengths and building off those strengths. Applying for Social Security disability and waivers, this is not one of those times. This is where you want to kind of talk about what's the real hard parts. That would be my
Thank you. That's a good point. Some of these are going to be so difficult for you to answer because, as you said, each state implements their programs differently. But let's give this one a try because we have a lot of upvotes on it. I'm not sure if you can answer it or not, but maybe you'll be able to help families know how they can compare state by state, which are the best states for supporting adults with Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And I don't know. I'm going to put you on the hot seat.
I like living in Minnesota, and I think we have a really good support system here.
That's great.
But
how about any resources that you have or where people could go to look to compare state by state? Isn't there a state report card, something like that? I think that I saw that that was posted. No? Yeah. Oh.
That's a really hard question to answer. I think it starts with talking with other parents here and seeing what they've been able to get and how hard or how easy it was for them. There are obviously some states that don't have wait lists for waivers. There's some states that have very long wait lists for waivers. Our state has recently in 22 dedicated the state legislator decided to appropriate a good chunk. So our wait list went from around 8,000 down to about 2,000. And that's only, the 2,000 is only because since 2022, that's how many people have now signed up, new kids and adults have signed up for the wait list. So it's getting better. But the support staff to give those services is still lacking because of funding. So within every state, there could be, good things and bad things. I hear a lot of good things about Minnesota, Washington, California. Kelly Thorson and her family in Missouri, they seem to have some really good services. There are other states that have, long wait lists, and it's a give and take. It's a give and take. But also keep in mind, if you're thinking, we're going to move to this state, you make sure before you just make that move, is that how easy is that state going to allow you to get on their state services? Because I tell you what, Oklahoma decided to pass a bill that if you move into our state, you have to wait automatically 5 years.
Yeah. So how do people
I
find
love
out?
Oklahoma. Don't get me wrong. I love Oklahoma. I was born there, but come on.
Right, but are there some online resources? I think, Janet, not to put you on the spot, I think that NORD has that report card.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, the state
yeah,
disability report cards on Rare Action Network.
Yeah, Rare Action Network.
Right, that's a place to start. And then, as you said, speak with families. You can contact the foundation. We have reps in different parts of the state. We can get you in touch with them, and you can do as our panel has said, is talk with other families from that state and see if you can get some feedback directly from families. But go ahead, Rick.
To my knowledge, the only entitlement program in the country is California's. Meaning, if you qualify, we do, you're in. You don't wait. It takes a month, maybe two. So, and that is a law that was passed 56 years ago now. So it's embedded. It's a line item in the budget as opposed to something that was going to expire. So, and that's in response to the question, what are the best states for supporting adults with PMS? It's very difficult to answer, of course, but I throw that out for California. The problem is that you got to have $1 million to buy a house there. So
There you go.
Is
Pay
what
for
it
it
is.
somehow. Right. We have a question about Medicare. Is Medicare something that families should look into? You're talking about Medicaid and waivers. Medicare is different.
So there's this thing called Medi, which the states administer the money that's given by the federal government. That's how it works. And many states have it in which you can combine Medicaid with Medicare for effectively double coverage. I don't know whether it's available in your state, but it's something to ask. In our instance, once our child turned 3 and we realized that there was funding available, from the age of 3 to almost 29, we've never had a single hospital bill. And there have been a whole lot of bills. So the programs work. You just got to get in.
We have one question about Katie Beckett. Do any of you know the max dollar allowance, or does that vary? Max dollar allowance.
Couldn't quite hear you.
You can't hear? Oh, Katie Beckett. Do you know anything about the caps or dollar allowance, or does that vary state to state?
It varies state to state.
Yeah. Okay. We do have some pretty specific questions. There was a follow-up on the 22Q13 code. So
about
that's-
that Katie Beckett question,
Yep.
website I mentioned, kidswaivers.org, each state outlines if you have that Katie Beckett program and the rules in there. So look in there for your state.
Okay. I have one question that's specific to Minnesota. They received the CSG and asking if this is similar and are there other options, because we're told our income is too high. So maybe in general, just talking about which programs are income-based. Might be not just Minnesota, but
Yeah,
in
well,
states.
it varies, right? So different
Yep.
states have different rules about whether
Sure.
the income and assets apply to the TEFRA and Katie Beckett programs and how much. But the CSG, I believe, is the Consumer Support Grant, which is self-directed services way that they do the waivers. So it's very possible that they're not going
Okay.
to qualify. over
Another
that.
one, a little bit specific, but maybe in general, you can talk about this, and this aligns with us being advocates more than we ever intended to be. We have somebody who's currently working on denial for a mobility device, and they're in the situation where they need to go in front of a judge, and they're wondering what resources might be available to them. They're lost in the process and feel inadequate to win. What would you recommend?
Yeah, look up, just go to Google, whatever state you're in, and just put that state, Oklahoma, Disability Law Center or Disability Law Centers, or Texas or Kansas, whatever, and something should pop up, because there is a disability law. I think it's a federal program that they will have a disability law center in almost every single state. There's also the ARC. ARC can give you great resources too. to help you get an advocate. There are many advocacy programs and advocacy groups and organizations in every state. It's just a matter of finding them, and they can go with you. I wish you were close. I would go with you. They could go with you to in front of the judge to explain the process. But get a hold of one of those. Look for Disability Law Center, because they are going to give you the best legalese to use, and always document, and get endless information and statements of necessity, medical necessity from doctors. As many doctors, therapists you can get for that device. Oh, Katie.
Katie?
There we go. See what happens?
Yeah, and I think she's not new to that. That offer is because it's been outstanding for many, many years. In California, we've got, believe it or not, an agency that's funded by the state to advocate for those who are receiving services. So you don't have to go pay somebody. And in many states, they're nonprofits, or they're NGOs, non-government organizations, but are funded by the state. So I would not, in California we call it a fair hearing if you got a disagreement. I don't know what it is in other states, but I would not go in front of a judge. I would not go in front of a judge and try to explain why it is that I need something without assistance of counsel. And that's what you get in most states by way of maybe a legal advocate or another advocate, but somebody who knows how to navigate that process.
I was just chatting with a family member who had a resource for the last question. Century Foundation, have you heard of that? That's a rating system for state resources. So we'll try to get that posted somewhere and add that to your resource list. So thank you for that. We have a comment here too that a family is using self-determination has saved their family $60,000 a year for things that they had previously paid for. So that's similar, Rick, to what you were saying. So even though sounds like it's a lot of work, it's worth it. Whatever, find out what documentation they need and be persistent. And it can save a lot of money. Okay, wait lists. I think that's state by state. We had a question. And if there's a difference between 0 to 18 and 18 plus, but I don't want to answer for you, but it seems like that one is state specific.
We've got somebody right up here in a pink shirt raising their hand. They got a question. Thank you.
I just want to say, in our experience for mobility devices and going up against the insurance company and other organizations trying to get what we need, it's really important to, besides, well, my child needs this, what does your family need? My son was so large, he was collapsing, baby strollers, and we couldn't move him. And we were denied 3 times for a, wheelchair, and we were having a lot of difficulty. And the school psychologist at his school helped me realize, we had to write this packet of information and take pictures. And we said things like, we can't go to our daughter's volleyball games because Jake can't sit on bleachers. He will fall backwards. We can't go to the park for a family picnic because he can't sit on a picnic table. And I think by the time we submitted, we had 17 pages of documentation and photos, and it went through. And so I learned you have to think more globally than about your child, but how it's affecting your family life, interactions with other family members and the community, and show that this is, hugely beneficial for your child, just beside the medical necessity point.
Thank you. Sounds like you were persistent and it worked out. So that's right. I think we're coming up on time. One more question. Sometimes I feel bad about asking for resources because there are so many people and families who need help.
Boy, I've been through that. One could argue that there ought to be a sliding scale depending upon income. No. we all deserve the support we deserve to take advantage of the support that's available, and we deserve to advocate for more support. There are 250 million people in this country, and there is enough money, depending upon the allocations that the politicians give those who make those decisions. So I have gotten over it. And frankly, the reason is that, these services save your life and the life of your family. And many of us have other children who are impacted by this. I can remember so many years ago, particularly before we got into self-determination, where, I just felt like the water was right here, right under my nose. And we didn't realize at the time that we were just fracturing, just dying as a family unit. And so, Ruth, I think your comment is a really good one, which is a person-centered plan is a family plan. And it's a life plan for the child as well as everybody else in the family. And so I don't think you feel bad all you want and go after the money. And it's so crass to say go after the money, but that's what it is, because it costs. This stuff costs. And we all struggle with trying to meet the needs of our child, of our family, with whatever our resources are. They're available. Go after them.
Very well said. So advocate. Don't feel like you need to hold back. This is something that we need. It's a long road. Right. I want to thank all of you, Allie, Rick, Janet, and I also want to let people know that we will, whatever resources we have, we will post on the website. We will post them on the virtual conference center, and always reach out to other families, reach out to the foundation. Janet's always willing to help too. So good luck with advocating for your child or adult. So we're all in this together. Thank you to our panel.